What about some mirth moments? Yeah. I must say that you've been sending me mirth moments, dear friends. All I can say politely is some of these are suitable for what they used to call private delectation. And not to be shared on a Sunday morning. I had a great one. Somebody told me this guy is sitting quietly in front of the TV set one evening, watching his favorite program, and his wife comes in, and she gives him a clip round the ear that knocks him halfway across the couch. You know, what I do, honey? What I do? She said, look, I found this woman's name in your pants pocket. He said, oh, I can explain that. That was a horse I backed a couple of weeks ago. You know, it lost and big deal. And well, she said, I'm sorry, I overreacted. Forgive me. So a couple of weeks later, he's sitting in the same place watching his favorite television program. His wife comes in. She gives him a whop across the other side that knocks him half senseless. He said, what'd I do this time? She said, your horse is on the phone. Here's a great one for some of us who are toward the upper end of the spectrum. I feel like my body has gotten totally out of shape. So I got my doctor's permission to join a fitness club and start exercising. I decided to take an aerobics class for seniors. I bent, I twisted, I gyrated, I jumped up and down, I perspired for an hour. But by the time I got the leotards on, the class was over. One-liners, cannibal, someone who is fed up with people. Egotist, someone, usually me, deep in conversation. Gossip, a person who will never tell a lie if the truth will do more damage. Handkerchief, cold storage. Inflation, cutting money in half without damaging the paper. Secret, something you tell one person at a time. Tomorrow, one of the greatest labor-saving devices of today. Well, keep them coming, folks, keep them coming. I shall animadvert. I'm going to share some ideas. Everything today is going to center around the one word, why. And you'll see why. About 2,500 years ago, in ancient Greece, there was a man called Thales of Miletus. He was a peripatetic, a wandering philosopher. And he's the first person that we actually know of who asked that essentially human question that only we can ask. Why? Why are things as they are? Why does the sun rise in the morning? Why am I in the position I'm in? Why is my situation as it is? Why are my relationships what they are? He asked this question, why? And he's often credited as the first person who ever asked this essentially and fundamentally human question. Of course, there must have been people long before him who asked it, but we know that he did this. And the point of the matter is that this ability to ask why is at the very heart, at the very core of what makes us human. It's also at the very basis of what makes us spiritual beings. It helps us to advance and to accept or even initiate change in our lives. Without that essentially self-reflective question, we could be cows in a field chewing a cud of grass. Why is what distinguishes us as extraordinary creatures. That question, why? Of course, why is asked in the Bible. One of the most famous of all why questions is that offered by Job, the book of Job. He's sitting there lament. Don't you love a lament? I love a lament. Have you ever heard an Irish kern, a Celtic kern? It's a great lament. Why, says Job, should the sufferer be born to see the light? That's not a question your average animal asks. Why is life given to men who find it so bitter? Why? Oh my God, this bunch are beginning to cry. Why should a man be born to wander blindly, hedged in by God on every side? That's the classic lament, the interrogatory that is questioning the universe, God, circumstances, and saying, why am I sitting here enduring what I'm enduring? And we know what Job went through. Well, if you want to see how all that turned out, read the book of Job. I'm not going to do it here this morning. Heaven knows I pontificate enough. I'm just sharing ideas, basically. Let's get back to Psalm 22, which is another important point. Many people say, aha, even Jesus asked the question why in a negative sense. He didn't ask it in a positive way to help him move forward with his life. And they always cite that passage about Jesus on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Why hast thou forsaken me? Oh, this is proof that at the last moment, Jesus lost his faith in God. So the why is basically a negative question. No, not at all. Bible scholars recognize that when Jesus uttered those words on the cross, possibly in the delirium of pain and even drug induction, when he uttered those words, because drugs were given to criminals on the cross to ease the pain, when he spoke those words, he was in all probability uttering Psalm 22. He knew Psalm 22. And Psalm 22 in those days ended in a different place, a quite different place. After this rhetorical question, why God, why my Lord, hast thou forsaken me? We have, where the psalm originally ended, these words. The Lord has not scorned the downtrodden, nor shrunk from them in loathing, nor hidden his face from them. The Lord has always given heed to those that have cried out. It's a whole different interpretation. What I want to try to do this morning is to convey to you the importance of this interrogatory in our lives. Until we start asking the question why in a positive sense, we tend to limit our possibility of forward movement in life. If we just sit there and say, why has this happened to me? Why have these circumstances occurred? Why do I find myself in the place that I do? I remember once sitting in a plane next to somebody on a flight to Denver, I think it was, and she spent the entire flight telling me about the unfortunate death of her mother. And she said, why did my mother have to die at this point? Why did my mother leave me alone? Why do I have all my mother's debts to consider? Why? And I said to her before she left the plane, I said, why are you making the why, the interrogatory, always so negative? I wasn't quite that dramatic. I said, why not use the question why as the introduction to a way of changing circumstances and situations? The only way we can ever change in our lives, the only way we can ever bring the essential change that spiritual progress demands of us is to ask the question why in a positive sense. Because when we sit there on our backsides and say, like Job, why did God do this? Why this? Why this? Why this? Nothing happens. When we ask the why in a positive way and say, it's a prelude to a change in our experience, in our ability to change our lives, we're moving forward as our spiritual progress demands. The why is one of the most extraordinary capacities that human beings have. And so many of us sit on our backsides for years and years and years. I do the same thing, saying, why? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Okay, did God do it? Chances are I did it to myself. There are many people in Unity who believe that we bring to us the experiences we need to work through. That's our Eastern heritage with the whole karmic notion behind it. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know whether we bring to us the experiences we need to work through. What I do know is that if we use the why, the interrogatory capacity that we have as human beings and that no other animal shares, if we use that in the positive way, we begin to move forward in our understanding, in our appreciation of life, and in the capacity to change what we are experiencing. That's all I'm saying. If you don't agree with that, put your hand up. Fine. That's right. Anybody here? I had a wonderful experience many years ago. I found, no, that's not quite true. I didn't find myself. I went there voluntarily. I was at a medical ethics conference in London. Somebody has a hand up. Just about to give it. You anticipate me. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. I was at a medical ethics conference in London some years ago, and it was an interesting experience. I was the medical ethicist, because I have a background somewhat slender, but a background in ethics from my formal philosophy training. All the others were medical doctors. And during a break in one of the sessions, I was talking to a man, probably in his 60s. He was quite a well-recognized surgeon in London, and he was from Africa. I don't know what part of Africa. I think possibly what they used to call the Belgian Congo, which is a personal fief of the Belgian royal family at that time. And he lived in a village. He had lived in a village. He was a young man with obviously a high intelligence quotient, but of course, living in the village that he did, there was no possibility of any forward movement in any direction. He'd resigned himself to being, I suppose, a cowherd or whatever. Nothing wrong with that, but when you see a greater perspective, a broader perspective, perhaps you naturally want to pursue it. But there was no possibility. And then one day, a medical team from the United Nations came, and they performed some very useful functions in the village, helping those who were unwell. And as a result, this young man, as he then was, decided he wanted to be a doctor. But he said the point was that in his language, I don't know whether he spoke French or not, because the Congo was in effect bilingual at that time, I suspect not, but in his language, there was no word for why. He couldn't question his circumstances. There was no way he could exercise the fundamental human prerogative of asking, why am I here? Why are these circumstances occurring in my life? Why is this happening to me? He couldn't answer that. And he said one of the medical team happened to be a German. And he gave him the German word for why. Warum, 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 why? And he said, suddenly I realized I could ask why. I didn't have to accept unthinkingly what was occurring to me. I didn't have to believe that the gods, whoever they were condemning me to this kind of existence. I could say why and use that why in a positive sense to change my circumstances. He did. He did. He did. And, 40 years later, he winds up as a top consultant in a London hospital. Now, you may say, well, that's hardly nirvana. Well, I would agree with you as a matter of fact. But he changed his life by asking why. And I think so many of us neglect the importance of that interrogatory. Number one, it is what makes us human beings. I have no doubt about that. It is what makes us human beings. The capacity to ask of our circumstances, our situations, our relationships, why? You don't have to ask the great question, why am I here? Well, that's called an imponderable. But we can ask why in reasonable, rational, sensible terms that will still advance us spiritually and literally in our lives. We can ask this question. Number two, it gives us, it returns to us, it confirms in us the fundamental human capacity for volition. You know what I mean? Volition means an exercise of the will. We can say, I am not a piece of cosmic driftwood. I am not being hurtled towards some sort of cosmic storm drain by the fiat of God. I take responsibility for my existence, my life, my fulfillment, and I can do this through asking why, and I can do this through asserting my volition, my will. Now, all right, some people may come up with all the limitations that may encircle those two conclusions. That's all right, that's fine. Oh, I can't. This, that, the other, and everything else. All right, that's fine. But that doesn't vitiate, that doesn't negate the fundamental truth that when we ask of our circumstances in a positive sense, why, we open potentially the door to new experience, forward movement, a changed perspective, and an entirely different view of life. Unity is all about freedom. Unity is a funny organization, folks. Unity is an idealist organization. We deal with ideals. We are idealists. But we are practical idealists. That's funny, isn't it? Some people have called us practical mysticists, which is a nutty kind of combination. But the Fillmores, our co-founders, the Fillmores' desire was to bring ideals into the practical domain. This whole notion of asking the question why, of even taking responsibility for our own position in life, these are fundamentally idealist views, but they result, if carefully understood and placed into a practical perspective, they eventuate in results that are demonstrable, that are palpable, that are available to us. I think unity is practical. I've always thought that. You may think I'm an old waffler. I don't give a damn at my age. All I want to do is share ideas. That's all I want to do. share. I'm not a dogmatist. I'm not an elitist. I have no interest in trying to make you think anything that you don't want to think. What I want to do is stimulate all of us to think about these extraordinary possibilities that are inherent in us as self-reflective creatures, self-reflective human beings. To me, at the very basis, at the very heart of this capacity lies this question, why? We can use it as a lament. Why, all our lives. Why? God put me down, everybody put me down, my employers put me down, my body I don't care how far you want to go. Or you can take why and say, why? No, why is a prelude to something greater, something that will allow me to move forward. And I don't like to use spatial metaphors because they're misleading, but something that allows us to move forward in our experience. If I begin to ask why, we're on the very cusp, we're on the very edge of changing and saying, no, there's a different way, there's a better way, there's another way. And in that way, we move forward into a fuller appreciation of the extraordinary capacity of life that awaits us, which indeed is infinite and invites us to move forward. Now I will sit down and shut up.